What's up, sports fans? It's time for Let Me Speak. I'm Joe Braverman, and on this show, we discuss the big news in the world of sports as heard from me, myself, and I. Here's what we'll be talking about this week. Which teams in the NBA should be monitored as the playoff chase heats up? Plus, as the MLB begins spring training, the storylines to monitor throughout the spring. And is it time to outlaw court and field storming in college sports? You're listening to episode 105 of Let Me Speak. Let's get things started. Fire up that intro.
Let me speak.
And we are back coming at you here on Tuesday, February 27, 2024 for the 105th edition of Let Me Speak. I thank you everyone for tuning in wherever you are getting this podcast. For those that have been following along, we didn't have a show last week, as you might have heard from our last episode that we released 2 weeks ago. It was a little bit under the weather, coming down with a cold a little bit, but we're powering through. We're still a little bit on the last stages of it. You know, it's just that little tiny thing where you still have a little cough, a little bit of the sniffles now and again, but we are all good and we're feeling ready to bring you a brand new episode. And we've got a lot planned for you for this episode, aside from our Let's Get Local and our LOL moments that we normally do. We got to look at baseball. We got to look at the big story with college sports. But we are going to start this show by looking at the NBA, because this is where the focus on the NBA really is magnified. You know, post Super Bowl, we're in a little bit of that lull. You know, baseball is just getting its feet under them. You know, you had pitchers and catchers reporting, but it's really been the NBA that's been taking center stage for the past 2 weeks or so now that the NFL is in its offseason. And I'm ready for this chase for the championship. I'm ready for it to ramp up, especially considering the dud of an all-star weekend that we saw in Indiana. I mean, I could go on and on. I could have a whole episode dedicated to what I thought about all-star weekend, which to me was a little bit of a not very good. I want to get into now the regular season, because it's technically the second half, even though it's past the halfway point when it's that all-star break. It's still very confusing to me, but I think we have to really start looking at the playoff situation, because that's where really everyone makes their money. And I think there are a lot of things to watch for as we get into the last couple stages of the playoffs, because I think we're about a month and a half away from the season coming to an end and the playoffs getting underway. So I think there are a couple of things that I really want to watch for during this last stretch of games. I think the big thing for me is in the East, who is going to challenge the Boston Celtics? Because I think everyone agrees, or from what I've read with most people when they're talking about the NBA, there's no doubt that the Celtics, at least in the Eastern Conference, are levels above everyone else. I mean, I'm looking at their standings right now, and they're up 7.5 on Cleveland for the first spot. I mean, they've won 8 straight. They've just been absolutely on a roll, and we'll dive more into the Celtics later on. But I'm curious about who behind them is really going to be that big challenger. You know, is it going to be a situation where the Celtics are just going to steamroll over everyone, or are there actual challenges out there? Because I mean, when you look at the second spot with Cleveland, and then you go to the 8th spot right now with the Orlando Magic, that's a total of 6 games in between those spots. So there is some shuffling that can happen, but it's the one team that I'm really trying to find as who can be the biggest challengers to Boston. And, you know, I don't really, I'm just going to preface this by saying that I don't believe in any of these teams to make really a deep title run, you know, regarding Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, Philly, Miami, Indiana, and Orlando as those teams. But out of those teams, I think the best chance to give the Celtics a test would be the Bucks, because really they have all the pieces. They just haven't been able to put it together. And I've been critical of them for the past couple of weeks because they brought in Doc Rivers midseason, which I hate the move. Like I like Doc Rivers as a coach, but I wouldn't have fired Adrian Griffin at that time and bring in Doc Rivers, a couple of weeks before you get that All-Star break, and now you really have to secure some things. I don't know if that's enough time for them to really turn things around. But if Doc Rivers can get these guys to play some defense, then they can be a challenge. I mean, obviously, Chris Middleton just continues to get hit with the injury bug. He hasn't been playing in forever, but you have one of the more lethal combinations with Dame Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis has been able to take that step back, and Damian Lillard has been trying to insert himself more aggressively on the offensive side of the ball. But I just don't see the depth that Milwaukee has compared to Boston. I mean, Boston has a bunch of depth, but like I can't put Brook Lopez in the same spot as Kristaps Porzingis. I can't put Bobby Portis in the same spot as Al Horford. They just don't have enough, I think, for me to really challenge the Celtics. But they are the team that has the best shot of making that happen. Because really, when I look at the rest of the conference, I mean, the Knicks aren't at full health yet. Plus, they're sitting in fourth right now. The Cavs and the Pacers, at least to me, need a few more meaningful wins against some top teams. And then the Sixers don't really, I think, have enough to cover for Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey is not the guy to lead a team just yet. Still a little bit early for him, but he's not that number one guy that can clearly take over. And the Sixers just don't have the pieces as well to cover for them. Now, what is interesting, which is another story I want to fall into, is about the Sixers. I mean, they are sitting in fifth place right now, and they only have a game up on Indiana, who's in the seventh spot. And that seventh spot is the first play-in spot. Now, this could be a little bit risky because it's similar to what everyone was saying about the Brooklyn Nets a couple of years ago when they had a bunch they couldn't get their big three to play, and then they eventually traded James Harden out, and Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, those Nets fell into the play-in spot. Everyone was saying, "Oh, that can be an upset and the Celtics can lose." Well, the Nets got swept, and while there was some challenge from them, they weren't any match for that Celtics team. In terms of this Sixers team, I think it's a little bit different because of Joel Embiid. I really do think so, because Joel Embiid is much more dominant than Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were at that time. And just Embiid's presence alone should be that much of a factor. So I think for Philly, that's an advantage to them if they fall into the play. And not saying they should be targeting going for the play-in, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they fall into that play-in spot, because then you get a tough matchup with either the Celtics or whoever falls into that 2 spot, whether it be Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, whoever it may be. So if Philly falls into that spot, they win, they get out of the play-in, and they give a very early test to either of the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference. And I think that is a big challenge. I'm not going to say like they will absolutely, I'm not going to go out and say that if Philly gets into the play-in and they get out of that play-in, they're definitely going to upset whoever that is. I'm just saying it's going to be more of a test than it was the Brooklyn side of things back in 2022. So don't sleep on Philly when Joel Embiid returns. I think Embiid does have to return before the playoffs gets underway to get his legs under him, maybe under some kind of minutes restriction that Nick Nurse might give him. And then when you get to the playoffs, you just go ahead and let him unleash, because I'm sorry, there are not many out there that can stop Joel Embiid when he's at his maximum potential. I know he's had a bad playoff history, but still, I would bet good money that Embiid would show up in the playoffs and make things really tough for the rest of the East when it comes down to having to face them and get their run to the championship. So that's really in the Eastern Conference. What I'm looking at is where are the Sixers going to fall and who's going to be the team that steps up and challenges the Celtics right now. I mean, I still would put the Celtics ahead of everyone else to get to the NBA Finals out of the East, but I at least want someone to see. I want to see if there's going to be anyone out there who's going to, face them head on and just say, "We're not scared of you. We're going to take it to you, and things are not going to be as easy as you think they are." So that's in the East. The Western Conference, though, I think has a lot more questions than it has answers. I mean, you look at how tight things are with the West. On this day, on this February 27th, it's 10 and a half games separating the first playoff team, which is Minnesota, and the last playoff team in Golden State in that 10th spot. I mean, 10 and a half. Things can change on a dime. But I think obviously the big story is those top four right now with Minnesota, OKC tied with that in the first spot. Then you've got Denver at 3, a game and a half back, and the Clippers that are 2.5 back. Now, I think out of those four teams, the one I have most confidence in would probably be Denver, just because of their experience. They have, I think, the most unstoppable player in Nikola Jokic in the entire league. Plus, they just went on a championship run a year ago. That would put them over the top for me because I look at the Timberwolves. They're well constructed, but they haven't had that big playoff experience quite yet with this group. When you have Towns and Gobert, Anthony Edwards, so on and so on. Oklahoma City is a very, very young team. They have so much inexperience when it comes to these big moments. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a player that's ready for that big moment, but I think everyone else, Chet Holmgren, Josh Giddey, all these other guys, Jalen Williams, I don't think they're ready for that. And then on the Clippers side of things, their roster is mostly comprised of guys that don't show up in the playoffs. Really, the only guy that they have is Kawhi Leonard. Why? Because he has a couple of rings on his finger. James Harden always disappears in the playoffs. Paul George always disappears in the playoffs. And while I do like their depth, I don't, when it comes down to guys who need to step up. I mean, I'll throw Russell Westbrook in there, I guess. I mean, I hate to do that, but he hasn't really gone that far in the playoffs in quite some time. So that's why Denver, to me, puts it over the edge. They have experience. They have a great roster, pretty much returning almost everyone from last year's championship run. I will say, though, they need to avoid getting out of fourth place because I think out of those four, whoever goes in fourth is going to be in real danger. Maybe not, up. They're not going to automatically lose. But if you see the Phoenix Suns right there in that fifth spot, I know right now they're tied with the Pelicans, but I would just say whoever has to play the Phoenix Suns, you got to watch out because this is a team that I talked about 2 weeks ago in our latest episode. They made great improvements at the deadline. They've got a lot of depth. They just can't get that starting unit to play with each other on a consistent role. You don't have Durant, Booker, and Beal all playing at the same time in this regular season. When you get them together, I think they can be a really good team. And I was able to watch Sunday when they beat the Lakers. I really like Yusuf Nurkic at that center spot. I think he's a very underrated player, and he can do some really good things for Phoenix. And they upgraded their experience. They upgraded their depth. So I think whoever in that top spot or in any of those top four spots, whoever has to play Phoenix, I got to say, be careful because they can really take it to the limit. So it's really that top part of the conference that I'm watching. I'm also watching that bottom part of the conference. I mean, the story has to be, feels like the story is always about the Lakers and the Warriors right now sitting at the ninth and the 10th spot. I mean, really looking at it right now, they've got about 3.5 games up on Utah right now. I don't think the Lakers or the Warriors are in any danger of missing the playoffs unless they go on a really, really bad slide. But it's funny with you had the Lakers last year come from the play and then they got all the way to the conference finals. And, there are some, I think Kendrick Perkins specifically is saying, watch out for the Lakers because they can make a run. I don't honestly have that much faith that the Lakers can, because I said it, like They didn't do anything at the deadline, so I don't really expect them to make that same run that they did a year ago this year. Golden State, though, is an interesting one, though. I think they can make an impact because of the lineup change that Steve Kerr decided to make. I think deciding to put Brandon Podchimsky, I think that's how you say his name, putting him in and putting Klay Thompson on the bench might have solved the problem. When you have him, when you have Thompson with some fresh legs, I mean, those past couple of games off the bench, he's been absolutely lethal. It's like he's got his groove back. And then you have a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, who was able to take advantage of the absence of Draymond Green. Now you have him in a confident spot in that lineup. And of course, you have the greatest shooter of all time in Stephen Curry, who he might be slowing down. It definitely doesn't look like it, at least for this year, but he will eventually be slowing down. I think Golden State can make some noise. I think they can get out of the play-in from that 10 spot. I don't know if you would I would put them, up with Minnesota or with Oklahoma City. I don't know if I can do that yet, but I think the Warriors can at least, rattle some cages a little bit, maybe uh get the odds makers turning one way. Um just because not only you have experience, but this all of a sudden this burst that they've had. I mean, Steve Kerr, when you have a lineup with all-time greats like a Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, that core, it's really difficult to shake it up and start to plan for that future. But Kerr has done a great job of balancing it by deciding to move Thompson to the bench, put the young guys in there, and provide some new life. And you'll be getting more experience with Chris Paul, who I will say is a playoff choker, but it's better to have him in that lineup and in that rotation, at least if you're trying to make some kind of playoff run. So that's really where I am with the Western Conference is watch out for Phoenix. Golden State can make some noise. And Denver right now would probably be my favorite coming out of the Western Conference just because it's so jumbled right now. But the beauty is that the playoffs don't start until mid-April, and there's so much that can change throughout the NBA. So that's our segment on the NBA, but we are going to dive into the MLB up next because spring training is underway and we got to look at the storylines and the teams. What do we have to watch for before the regular season gets underway? We will discuss coming up next. So as I said, it's late February, which means spring training in the MLB is getting underway. And I tell you, all of us would love to be in Florida or Arizona right now watching some spring training or just being there in general. Because let's be honest, I'll say this for me personally as well. I'm done with winter. I'm done with the cold weather. I'm done with the freezing temperatures. I'm ready for sunshine, ready for baseball to get started. I'm just ready for the spring and the summer. But getting back to spring training, I think there's some preconceived ideas that there are out there right now, and I think we need to pay attention to those as the spring goes along. We won't really know a ton until we get closer and closer to the start of the regular season, which will be near the end of March. But as of right now, with about a week, a little less than a week into a couple of games for spring training, I think there are some things that have to at least be monitored or at least have to make you raise an eyebrow. I think the first one clear has to be the Dodgers and how they make all the pieces work because they literally are trying to buy themselves a world championship for spending nearly $1 billion on all the pieces that they have and really how they make them work. I mean, you have Tyler Glass now, Yamamoto, Teoscar Hernandez, you name it, all the additions that they made. But of course, everyone's going to be watching Shohei, how he does as the Dodgers full-time DH, at least for this season. And I gotta say, I'm pretty optimistic with how he's approaching. I mean, he said he's looking for 50 at-bats. I think the spring training is really big, at least for Ohtani to get used to his new teammates and his new team because he hasn't had as many weapons as he's had now that he did with the Angels. I mean, the fact that he's got Mookie, he's got Freddie Freeman, he's got Max Muncy, he's got so many options at his disposal that I think he might be looking at it thinking that he doesn't need to take on such a huge role being the designated hitter. He doesn't have to pound the ball every single time. He can just go for a couple base hits now and again, just get on base, and everyone else will do the rest. But I really am curious to see what Dave Roberts, how he constructs his lineup and what he does with the pitching rotation, considering, all the additions that he's made, especially with Otani being obviously the centerpiece right now. How does the chemistry work with Otani and Betts and Freeman, all these guys kind of working together? I'm curious to see what the Dodgers will do during this spring training because they have all the pieces. I mean, on paper, they are the best team by a long shot. But the beauty of baseball is that they don't play on paper. They play on a mound. They play on a diamond. So I'll be really interested to see how the Dodgers are able to work their roster around because they have, I think, again, on paper, top lineup, top rotation out there. It's just a matter of how comfortable can these guys be, because I think everyone is there to every addition that they've made is expected to have a big impact, with all those names I just mentioned. So Dodgers, I think, top of the list right now. How do all those new guys get used to the new squad? Mixing it in with what odds makers are calling the favorites for the World Series. Shifting gears though to the American League, I think the biggest team to watch in the American League has to be the Orioles because they did finish with the best record. And I think the pressure is now on to be able to keep up the success that they had a year ago because everyone is hyping them up. I mean, I remember back when they had their postseason run, thinking like they are playing with house money, considering how young they are and the inexperience and the rebuild that they were able to go through. And now they have a new ownership that is ready to go out, spend, make some big moves rather than just, sitting on their hands and acting like a small market team. They're ready to act like a contending team who's going to make those moves. As you saw a couple of weeks ago with the trade for Corbin Burns. Now, I think there is a negative side, at least, to watching the Orioles because they're already dealing with the injury bug. We know that Gunnar Henderson is dealing with his oblique. We are hearing reports that Kyle Bradish is already going to start on the IL. He's got a problem with his UCL, and Bradish was a big piece to that starting rotation. But there is good news with all these injuries. As I mentioned, Corbin Burns, you just acquired him. Jackson Holiday is still in their ranks in the minor league system. There's potential that he can get to the major leagues at least by the end of this season. So, I mean, when you have Henderson, you have Adley Rutschman at the catcher spot. I mean, Santander. I mean, you name it. They just have a ton of great young pieces. And I think, I don't want to say that they're going to finish with the best record yet again, but I think if I had to pick a favorite early on, it would have to be Baltimore, considering last year's success and the fact that they were so young and they had to go through, like I talked about in the NBA when we're talking about with Minnesota and Oklahoma City, they haven't had that real heartbreak just yet. The Orioles just went through that a year ago. Despite having the best record, they go ahead and they get swept by the Rangers, who go on to win it all. So I think Baltimore being able to go through that is really a key component to them having a great year this season because they have that motivation now to go and get farther into the postseason. But they just have so many pieces. I'm curious if they make any changes because I think what they had last year, I think should work just fine. Aside from the small additions that they made, I think Burns being in the rotation is absolutely huge for them. But considering what they have in the field, I mean, they're returning Bautista, who will be healthy. I think he'll be one of the top closers out there. But I mean, you also picked up Craig Kimbrell as well. So I think you look at Rutschman, O'Hearn, Mateo, Hayes, Mullen, Mountcastle. I mean, they've got it all. They've got it all. And again, on paper, they're one of the top teams out there, if you ask me. So that's who I see as really the big team to watch for in the American League. But I will say one other team that I would like, to at least take note of is the fact that the Texas Rangers, the defending champions, aren't getting that much love at all. I mean, you have everyone talking about the Dodgers and the Orioles and the Braves, who are obviously the favorites, and the Astros, who have had success. It feels like no one has been talking about Texas, yet they were the big winners of last year. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they didn't make any significant changes to their roster. I mean, they didn't have a bunch of big free agency signings, and they still could. I mean, they have their old starter Jordan Montgomery, who's still out there on the market, possibly could re-sign. But as of right now, the only changes that they really made were Kirby Yates, getting him in a trade, and then signing a veteran to their bullpen, David Robertson. That's really been the only signings that they made. They're not going to have Max Scherzer until mid-season, but they at least addressed what they needed improvements on, which was their bullpen. I thought their bullpen needed the biggest work out of all. But again, just like Baltimore, they're returning the same pieces. They've got Adolis Garcia. They'll have Marcus Semien. They'll have Corey Seager. They'll have it all. And I think the Rangers need to get some more love. I really think that they do, because they are the defending champs. I think regardless of who it is, it could be a worst to first or a first to worst kind of team. I think they at least need some kind of attention, regardless of whether they are succeeding or not, because they did win it all. I mean, yes, you can have a drop off, but you at least have to pay attention to them, and at least put them in the ranks and give them the kind of buzz that they do deserve for winning it all last year. So those, at least for the first couple of days, is what I'm monitoring. I'm sure some more stuff will come out. I know the league is talking about those see-through uniforms, which I totally agree with them. They should have absolutely fixed it. But then again, it's a first world problem for them. I mean, that's just, the spring uniforms, and that's the PA, who are never satisfied. The MLB PA is never satisfied with what the MLB is giving them. So I'm sure more stories, as I said, will develop throughout the spring. But as of right now, those are the things that I want to monitor, at least through these first couple of days. But we got to shift from baseball to all the sports in general, because there's so much that we can dive into during our quick hit segment. So let's get into that coming up next. There is so much more to unpack, so let's get into it with our quick hit segment. And I think the big story that we saw, at least from this past weekend, was in the college basketball ranks, with yet again another basketball star getting into it with some court stormers. So if you don't know, or if you've been living under a rock, Wake Forest pulled the upset on Duke at home. And as usual, when you have an upset like that, you got fans who go ahead and storm the court. Now, the issue is that one of these fans collided with Kyle Filipowski from Duke, and it turns out he injured his knee after that collision. It wasn't a major injury that they're saying, but he does say he's a little bit sore. Now, I will say this. When you're looking at the footage and you're looking at it, slowed down, you can see, I'm not saying it was intentional. It was just, wrong place, wrong time. I do think it was a little bit of an oversell by Filipowski, but of course you don't intend for that kind of collision. I mean, we saw the same thing with Caitlin Clark. That looked like a flop. You could see the arms clearly push out there. Now, not saying that it was wrong of them to flop, because it does not make things any better. To see athletes get hurt because it's out of their control. So be on the court or on the field when you have this storming of the court. Like, I think that is wrong. That's where the issue runs in. Now, I would much rather see modifications than getting rid of the court storming entirely, because, I'm still relatively young. I'm still on the young side of sort of looking at this idea of, oh, this is some kind of, memory or whatever. So I think the way I want to see it is that you have to let the opposing players and the coaches exit first, and then you can start to have some fun and go storm the court or anything like that. It's the second time that an injury happened. I just don't understand. Like, I appreciate the serious consideration that we're getting from this, because I think the traditional storming of the court or the field right when the buzzer sounds, when it hits zero, I think that has to come to an end. It's putting athletes at risk, because it's basically, I hate to put like the criminal aspect into this, but it's basically like an invasion or whatever. Trying to find the right legal terms for it. It's trespassing. That's what I was thinking of. It's basically trespassing, because you have the players and the coaches on the court doing what they're supposed to do, and you have the fans at the end come onto the court when they're not supposed to. So they either need to beef up the security for that, or allow the modifications of storming the court or storming the field. And the way I would see that modification is to let the opponent's players and coaches exit before everyone starts rushing. So it's got to be one of those two, because I think what's happening right now with your traditional court storming has to come to an end. I mean, we're lucky that Caitlin Clark and Kyle Filipowski did not injure themselves seriously, but that's the road that we're getting down. We're going to get to a point where the fans storm and someone gets seriously hurt. It could be a torn ACL or a dislocated shoulder from one of these collisions. It has to come to an end. It has to be at least modified. I wouldn't be insanely upset if court storming was entirely, banned and it was gotten rid of. I wouldn't be upset, but I would prefer to see those modifications take place rather than just do away with it. So that's the 2 cents that I have regarding this incident. The traditional ways has to stop. It has to, without a doubt. So that's the big story that we're getting out of college basketball, and hopefully more stories about the on-court stuff rather than fan storming and contacting players. That should come to an end. So I hope that the next time we talk about college basketball here on this podcast, it's because of the events that happen on the court during the game rather than the interactions of fans storming. But moving on, we're going to go to the NFL, because the franchise tag window opened up, which to me is really the first domino in terms of the NFL offseason. It's only been open for a few days. It's going to be open until March 5th, if my memory is correct. That's when the tag deadline will come to an end. And so far, we've only seen one player get tagged in these first couple of days, and that was T. Higgins. Bengals throwing the franchise tag on him. And honestly, I think it's a smart move by Cincy. They could not afford to lose him, because then the price tag is going to get very, very expensive. You already have Burrow signed to a big contract. You're going to sign Jamar Chase to a big contract. And T. Higgins was looking for top receiver money, no doubt about it. I don't think he's looking for second fiddle money to Jamar Chase. I think Higgins is the guy who wants to be sort of on that equal level. So I think Cincy, to get some kind of big Super Bowl run in there, they had to keep him on. And I'm sure Higgins is totally okay with being on a team like Cincy as well, if he's going to be competing for a championship. The big story to me, I think, in these first couple of days has been the running backs. If you remember last offseason, the story was that they wanted to get paid rather than just being franchise tagged. And sure enough, they came to a compromise. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, they all played under the franchise tag, and they just allowed to it. Well, guess what? Now those same players are most likely not going to get those tags. So that means you could be looking at a running back free agent market of Saquon, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler. I mean, if there are teams looking in the running back department, it is deep, absolutely deep. I mean, if you ask me, I think out of those guys, the top one would probably be Saquon Barkley. Just put him on a team where he doesn't have to have as much use as he did with the Giants. I think he would be a great upgrade for any team that's looking for a running back. I think Derrick Henry's sort of on the wrong side when you're talking about age. He's slowing down a little bit. He's still a dominant force, but he is slowing down a little bit. You got Tony Pollard as well. I think he'll probably stay with the Cowboys. I don't think they would want to get rid of him. It's Eckler and Jacobs that I really think are going to be the question marks out there. They could easily resign, but they could also leave as well. So that's the beauty of the franchise tag window is they could walk because I don't think any of those guys want to be playing under the tag once again. But staying in the NFL, we're gonna go to the combine. The combine starting this week. And the big, at least what I've been taking away is that you have prospects playing it safe more so the quarterbacks, the top three projected quarterbacks. You got Caleb Williams, he's not going to participate, and then you got Drake May and Jane Daniels who said they're not going to throw. Now, it makes sense because they don't want to hurt their stock or they don't want to get injured with these kinds of throws. I gotta say though, I don't like the trend that we're going under. The fact that these prospects are deciding not to showcase themselves, because I mean, logically, it makes sense. It makes sense for a guy like Caleb Williams who doesn't want to throw or do anything like that because he's already still projected as the number one. You're thinking like if Williams does participate, he could show some things that maybe might hurt his draft stock, whether it comes to throwing or simple stuff like that. I would think a guy like Jaden Daniels would want to participate a little bit more than usual because they were talking about him. I mean, the way he started during the season, he was like a second rounder. Then he moved up into the first round. Then he moved up to the top 10. And sure enough, boom, he's within the top five, depending on, what the Commanders and the Patriots do. I thought he would have done that. Same thing with Drake May. I thought he would have done a little bit more to maybe showcase that he deserves to be the number one pick over Caleb Williams. So I don't really like how it's becoming a trend, the fact that people are just deciding not to participate. And the idea, is just making executives for the NFL work a little bit harder in terms of their evaluation. So, I mean, who knows? It could be worth it. It could be worth it not to participate. You still keep your top prospects out there as well. You keep your stock up there. So I mean, we'll see if it pays off for these three guys. It's only a matter of time till we get some answers on that. Going back to baseball really quickly for this next one. We talked 2 weeks ago about the Scott Boras Five, those guys who were not signed quite yet as spring training was getting underway. Well, now we've got one of those five off the board. Cody Bellinger. He's back with the Cubs, 3 years, 80 million. There's a option after the first year and after the second year. I will say it was good on the Cubs to retain him. He was a key figure in that run they had to get to the postseason. They weren't able to get it, but he was very instrumental. He had an MVP level season. He was just really hampered by a bunch of injuries. But really, this signing, at least to me, would hopefully signal the fact that Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell, all these other guys are going to get re-signed because basically Scott Boras is almost like basically holding the league and other teams like he's hanging him out to dry because he just wants his guys to get the almighty dollar, because the way you're looking at it, I talked with Rich Keefe and Fitzy about this last night on the Rich Keefe show on WEI is when you have the guys hanging for so long, like it takes a long time for these baseball players to get their bodies into shape for a 162 game season over the span of 6 months. So, I mean, maybe the players, unless they're really dug their heels in, these guys should hopefully be signing soon so they can at least get ready for the season. But the last story that I wanted to mention during this segment was kind of a cool one in the NHL. You had Patrick Kane playing the Blackhawks for the first time, and he scores the overtime winner for Detroit in the very first game against his former team. I thought that was just really, really cool. I mean, Patrick Kane is pretty much a hero in Chicago. He's never going to buy a beer ever again because he was part of a Blackhawks team that won 3 Stanley Cups in that short amount of time. And then it was almost like you couldn't have drawn it up any better for a guy returning for the first time, for a Detroit team that's pushing for the playoffs while the Blackhawks are still in that rebuilding mode. I thought that was kind of cool to see Kane, kind of stick it to his old team, but sort of in a friendly kind of way. So good on Patrick Kane to make the most out of his first game against the Blackhawks, which was the team that basically molded his career out of that one. So there you have it with the quick hits. There was so much to get to, and we will have so much more as the weeks and months go along. But for all you Boston fans who have been waiting for this segment, we're going to get to it up next. It is our look around Boston with our Let's Get Local segment.
This is our city.
So now it is time to look around the city of Boston and all the sports within it. It's our Let's Get Local segment. And I think the biggest story, I mean, we can talk about the Celtics, which we will. We'll talk about the Bruins as well. But I think everyone around the region is talking about the dynasty regarding the Patriots. I mean, we'll get into all the draft and Elliott Wolf and all that stuff Gerard Mayo has to do. We've got plenty of time to do that. And I've got a whole line of guests that we can get on for that. But I want to spend this time talking about the dynasty on Apple TV. So far, 4 episodes are out of this 10-episode series. I will say this right now. This docuseries is a must watch. Every Pats fan needs to watch this docuseries, because whether you're like me and you're young and you don't really have that good of a memory, and you were too young to relive the first part of the Patriots dynasty, or if you're an old head who remembers the times where things were not that great, and then Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft and Tom Brady come around and they turn it around and turn this into maybe the best dynasty in NFL history, this is a must watch. It is an incredible series, and I don't want to spoil things too much, but I have a laundry list of notes from these first couple of episodes. I mean, the first one that I thought of goes back to like episode 1. I never knew how much of a star Drew Bledsoe was before Tom Brady came along. I mean, when you look at this docuseries, I mean, he's in McDonald's commercials. He signs a big contract. He leads the Patriots to their second Super Bowl against Green Bay. Yes, they got it blown up, but I never realized basically at that time, Drew Bledsoe was one of the faces of Boston sports. You could probably put him up there in the mid 90s with sort of a Roger Clemens, Pedro Martinez kind of thing. The Celtics were still kind of in their transition, so it wasn't quite Paul Pierce just yet. And the Bruins, same thing. But he was basically like up there in terms of the Mount Rushmore of the mid 90s when it comes to Boston athletes. So, I mean, the fact that Drew Bledsoe, when you listen to him, he makes it sound like he's the villain, because it was like, oh, I want to get my job back. I was extremely salty. You had Robert Kraft going up to Belichick being like, are you sure you're making the right decision starting this kid, Tom Brady? Now, I don't want to get it misconstrued. Drew Bledsoe is not going to be the villain in this docuseries. I think you really feel bad for it, because when you are labeled as this star and you're the savior of the franchise, when all of a sudden this new guy comes along and you're not going to get your old job back, of course you're going to feel a little bit upset. But he took his lumps like a man, and as you'll see later on, he humbled himself. He came in, helped the team. He didn't win the game against the Steelers in the AFC Championship, but he helped manage it after Tom Brady went out. And then he is a good teammate and lets Tom Brady start in the first Super Bowl against the St. Louis Rams and gets himself a ring because of it. So, I mean, that's the first takeaway I had, was the fact that the level that Drew Bledsoe was on was something I never even imagined. I knew he was, this great quarterback that the Patriots had before Tom Brady, but I never knew how much of the star impact that he had. Another thing that I took away was the fact that it took a while for Tom Brady to garner respect. Not really in the big picture of things, because, I mean, the clips show, Bob LaBelle saying, like, there is a little bit of a question, but then you have Bob Ryan being like, no. Drew's going to be the guy. Drew's going to be the guy. I'm talking about within the locker room. I mean, when you had Tom Brady in his first start against the Colts, even before then, you had teammates like Ty Law, like Willie McGinnis, like Teddy Bruschi being like, yeah, he's just the placeholder. You're just the guy in for Drew. So you had his own teammates not even believing in him. And then even as the season went along, when they went to Brady over Bledsoe, when Bledsoe was cleared, even still you had teammates being like, okay, he's still going to be the guy. It was basically the defensive guys were basically saying, we are going to carry this team, which they did do. But in terms of the respect factor, it took a long time for Brady to get it. I mean, it really took that second Super Bowl for everyone to be like, okay, he's the guy. He's the guy. I mean, really, for at least teammates after that first one, they kind of knew. You know, when you had guys like Ty Law, Teddy Bruschi, they knew after the first one. But I think in the general sense of it, it took that second Super Bowl win to be like, okay, this Brady guy is legit. He's definitely legit. Some other things I kind of looked at. I mean, I hated reliving the Spygate. You know, you saw that in episode 4, and the undefeated loss to the Giants. I hated reliving that because that was like one of the first core memories as a Patriots fan. I remember being over a family friends at the time, and it was the undefeated season, and that was the first time as a fan that I cried over a loss. You know, you have those. I would always be disappointed or angry. You know, I'm disappointed, angry now as a fan, but back then as a kid, I was in tears because I had my Moss jersey. I was ready for the 19-0. And then to even watch like the final Hail Mary attempt from Randy Moss, the fact that it hit his fingertips, I know part of it was a little bit knocked away, but the fact that they were that close is just, gosh, it puts a knot in my stomach now reliving it because I absolutely hate it. I think it's going to go down as the worst loss that I've witnessed as a Boston sports fan, without a doubt. Which, by the way, Randy Moss is incredible in this docu-series. I absolutely love listening to Randy and the story that he has. But really the big takeaways that I have in this docu-series is sort of what I saw and what they talked about during that first part of the dynasty run. And I'm talking, you know, from those mid 90s when Bill Belichick was first hired up until what they've showed, which is the undefeated Super Bowl loss. I'm kind of tying it in to what we are seeing with the modern day Patriots. You know, the fact that this team has had to go through a rebuild over these last 4 years or so. I mean, we finally have answers as to why Bill Belichick is short and stingy with the media, is because Eric Mangini ratted him and the Patriots out for the Spygate during week 1 of 2007. And that was basically the ultimate betrayal. Like, you could put Mangini and Belichick on Big Brother or Survivor when it comes to, or any of these reality shows when it comes to the fact that Belichick just couldn't trust him. And not only that, he basically said that if Mangini was telling the media and like ratting out who ultimately was Belichick's right hand man, if he was ratting him out and he was calling the team out, and if that's what he was doing to win, like, can Bill really trust anybody when he talks to the media? That's why I believe is why he's sort of, you know, up and at it and basically throwing the finger at all the media, because he can't trust them. He can't trust anything he says. Like, if he was wide open, he knew that, you know, at least in the Boston media side of things, they would run with some things. So I think part of that is the big thing that I see, is that because of that, Belichick is still incredibly short with the media. And when he's not giving any answers and you're kind of just sitting there like, can we get something? Can we get something? This is part of the reason why. I mean, you could even go back to like when the decision was made to give Tom Brady to start over Drew Bledsoe when Bledsoe was cleared. Belichick even said like, Brady will get the most reps, will get more reps over Belichick. Like, that's still an answer. Like, you're not getting an open Belichick now. Like, that's the answer we were looking for when it came down to the decision between Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. That's what we were looking for. But Belichick, because of Eric Mangini, which I ultimately said on the WEEI producer show with Chris Scheim and Ryan Garvin, Mangini is the reason why Belichick is very stingy and short with the media, all because of Eric Mangini. Thanks a lot, you dumb coach. Couldn't make it in the big league, and now you got to be Colin Cowherd's sidekick. My goodness. I think the other thing that I noticed, at least when you compare this to where the Patriots are now, I mean, the issues, at least between Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft, were shown very, very early. I mean, you could tell with Robert Kraft what he was saying. Like, he has resentment and bitterness all the way back in the 2000s. I mean, he was telling Belichick, like, he was basically saying, I will hold Bill accountable if starting Tom Brady over Drew Bledsoe doesn't work. I mean, in episode 3, when he was talking about Bill Parcells, he said Parcells will put himself over the team. All after Parcells said Kraft was meddling. He was hiring guys who didn't believe in the draft or didn't know as much as I did. I mean, the big story is, or the big quote I took was calling Belichick a schmuck when I don't want to mispronounce that at all. Calling him a schmuck when he was talking about the non-regret that Belichick has when it comes down to Spygate. So really, like, I'm not saying that Kraft has his hands on this entire docu-series and how it's going to turn out, because it's not turning out well for Belichick, and it's trying to put Robert Kraft to a good light. I mean, Jeff Benedict, who was the author of the book, and Matthew Hamachek, who was the director of the series, have ultimately stated that Kraft didn't have any say in the final cut. But it definitely feels like, and it looks like, Kraft wanted to mold it in a certain way where he wants to be uh, coming out as the good guy rather than not. So, I mean, these narratives could change though, because I mean, there's still 6 episodes left to go. I mean, we got to get into the Deflategate scandal. We got to get into the Malcolm Butler benching. We got to go over Tom Brady's departure. I mean, we got to go through so much more of that. So I'm definitely, like, the minute it comes out, if I'm not, at WEEI, if I have no plans whatsoever, I'm sitting on the couch, I'm turning on Apple TV, and I am watching this docuseries because it is that compelling. That compelling. But let's shift gears now and let's get more on a positive side of things. Let's look at the Celtics because they just keep on rolling. They are rolling post All-Star break. Easy wins over the Bulls and the Knicks. They've got 8 straight. They'll take on the Sixers tonight. And I think, honestly, nothing more needs to be said about the team until the playoffs spark, because this success needs to be carried throughout the playoffs. They need to use this on a playoff run. They cannot get into their own head. They have to solve those third quarter problems, which we saw against the Knicks. They have to solve their crunch time, which they did against the Heat before the All-Star break. So I will be paying close attention, at least, to the team in these next couple stretch of games. They'll be hosting the Sixers, the Mavericks, and the Warriors. Then they'll go to Cleveland, they'll go to Denver, and go to Phoenix. Those games I really want to pay close attention to. It's not going to ultimately, conclude and say, oh, if they win this game, they're going to win it all. Or if they lose it, they're not going to win. I'm not going to make it that. But I'm just going to pay close attention to how they play against these playoff and championship caliber teams. But what's funny is, more so than the team, Jason Tatum has been getting more of the conversation because everyone's trying to make the case for him being an MVP. And honestly, I would put him at the top of the MVP. Maybe not the very top, but I just wouldn't put him because, this is an award that is very stats driven. They don't necessarily, at the voters, I mean, they're not necessarily looking at, the team's success. They're kind of looking at, okay, who is the best player, and most of the time it is the best player on the best team. Now, there have been instances, Russell Westbrook, when he was putting up those historic triple doubles, the Thunder were sitting in 6th. It would always be like LeBron James, regardless of where they finish in the standings. But I mean, the thing is, I would love to see Jason Tatum win an MVP, but it just seems like the media and voters are ultimately, like, they're putting so many handicaps in front of him that I don't think should be there when it comes to, having success in the playoffs. He's had success in the playoffs. Does he have some help? Sure, he has some help. He has more help this year than in previous years, but I hate that so much is getting in his way. And I think it shouldn't get into his way. Like, if you're asking me, I think the ranks right now would go Nikola Jokic, probably Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and Jason Tatum. Like, those three are who I think it goes down to. And that's sort of the order I put it in now. Maybe it won't be. I don't think it's going to stay in that order because there's still plenty of season left to go. But in terms of the all-around play that Jason Tatum has done, that's what the team needs. And if he is the best player on the best team, sure, he should get that strong consideration. The thing is, though, I think he's got to, the way the league is now, he's got to put up like 30 points a game. And he knows it himself. Like, I think he's matured, and you've heard him say, like, MVP would be nice, but that's not the main thing that he's looking for. He's sort of matured in that way. Like, if he gets the MVP, it would be cool, but the title is the way it goes. And I forget who said, I think Rich Keefe might have said this. Like, once he wins the title, that's when he'll get sort of that respect and he'll get that serious consideration. As Boston fans, like, we see it already. But in terms of the national standpoint, he's got so much working against him. All the high caliber teammates that he has, the past playoff failures that he's had. That's the biggest issue, I think, that's getting in the way of Jason Tatum. But I do think before his career is up, he will win an MVP. There will be one year that he has a tremendous year that you cannot argue with it. Over Embiid, over Giannis, over Jokic, over Luka, all these guys. There will be a time. I don't know if it's this year, but he will get an MVP before his career is over, without a doubt. Shifting gears, though, I want to go to the Bruins, the other team that is playing, and my goodness, they are struggling. They are struggling, but they are salvaging points. That's the thing. 7 of their last 8 games have gone past regulation, at least into overtime. But here's the issue. I should also mention that includes 6 straight games, which, by the way, I looked at Elias, and the record is 7. 7 straight games, and Tampa did that in 18. 7 straight games at least going to OT. The problem with these 8 games is that they're 2-6 in this time. Like, they're salvaging points, but they're 2-6. And I think the big story, obviously, is the fact that they cannot close these games out. I mean, they were up 2-1 last night over Seattle, and they let them into it. I mean, yeah, they were eventually losing then 3-2, and they came back and tied it. But the fact is that they do have these leads, and they're blowing them. I mean, you can go back to the fact that they were up 2 with less than 8 minutes left in Vancouver. They had the 4-3 lead over the Kings a couple of weeks ago. I mean, this is not good. It is not a good stretch that the Bruins are on right now. So I think they really just have to find the basics. They really do. And the fact that I'm seeing David Pastrnak just basically find a target and shoot rather than just make a bunch of moves in a shootout, that's concerning to me. That's really concerning to me. And yes, everyone went into the year maybe not with Stanley Cup expectations, because they were so hard up against the cap, and they basically went all in on last year or whatever. But they're at least, I mean, the good news is that they're salvaging these points. They're salvaging the points, but the big issue I have are these leads. Like, they have to win a game from start to finish, and I think they need to start the first period at least with a lead, because their first period and their third period is really where they're falling behind. That's the biggest issue I see. If they can fix those, then they can sort of get back to their winning ways. But hopefully this is just a stretch, and the Bruins can find those winning ways once again. Finally, though, let's talk Red Sox, because their spring training gets underway, and I'll just make it really short. At least for the expectations, a lot of ifs need to go right. Tristan Casas jump needs to happen. A healthy Trevor Story needs to happen. Better defense from Rafael Devers. Young guys need to step up. There are a lot of ifs. A lot of ifs need to go right. I still don't think they have the pitching depth regarding their starting rotation, because you're asking Brian Bale, a young guy, to be your opening day starter. Nick Pivetta, who's been sort of an inconsistent starter. He's had really good moments, but he's also struggled. Lucas Giolito, who you're hoping avoids the injury bug. Now, they have had meetings with Jordan Montgomery, and I will say that if they sign him, it will be a good addition, but again, this is sort of similar to like giving a contract to Trevor Story or giving the extension to Rafi Devers. It's kind of front office and ownership looking at the fans being like, look, we're spending money. We're spending money. But it just feels sort of like forced and desperate at this point. You're kind of being forced to sign Montgomery because your fans are criticizing you for not spending and you know exactly what you need. So that's just short and sweet. I'm sure we'll talk more about the Red Sox when we get closer to the year, but a lot of ifs need to happen when it comes down to this. But I mean, 3-1 in spring training is pretty good start, I will say, if you ask me. So kind of a wait and see on there. So that is what is going on in the world of Boston sports. There is a lot that has to be unpacked, but we will end our show as we usually do, getting a good gut laugh in there with our LOL moment of the week. Stick around for that segment up next. Now, as I said, it's time to end the show as we always do by looking on the lighter side of things and looking at our LOL moment of the week. We are going to go to Darko Rajakovic. I want to say that right. Darko Rajakovic, the head coach of the Toronto Raptors for this one. So, backstory. The Raptors have won 3 straight games, including a very impressive win over the Pacers last night. But the coach, Rajakovic, my gosh, I'm going to have a hard time with this one, has given his team a reward. Normally you give a team for playing well, you give them some kind of reward, but this is a very interesting one. He said he would buy the team dinner, as most coaches would do, which I think is good. But he said that his team is so humble that we'll just get him pizza. So basically, the way people are taking it is that Darko Rajakovic is going to give his team, the Toronto Raptors, a pizza party. I mean, what are we? Are we in grade school? Is this the end of the year in a rec league? Throwing a pizza party for professional athletes? I mean, that's kind of embarrassing if you ask me. That is kind of embarrassing to give this team. Like, if that was me, I would be insisting on taking him out to dinner and letting him order steak or something more high priced than just a pizza party. Like, what are these guys aren't children. They're not little kids, throwing a birthday party or whatever. And not only that, I think if you're 22-36, 3 straight wins does not warrant any reward. I don't think if you're that bad, you shouldn't have any kind of reward for winning 3 straight games. Maybe if you win 6 straight or 7 straight, maybe that's something. That's something. But come on, 3 straight games? What are you doing here? My goodness. I mean, I've had some good pizza parties in the past, especially after, end of the years when it was rec league or whatever, being like, you know what? That was a great season. Let's celebrate by winning some pizza. Like, this is still technically a playoff push. Like, I know they're a couple of games out of at least the play-in spot, and 22-36 doesn't sound that good, but you're still fighting for the playoffs. You're still NBA team. You're still an NBA team where anything can happen. You could have the Bulls or whatever and the Nets, totally on a downslide, and you could sneak your way into that playoff picture. Like, come on, like a pizza party? You gotta be kidding me. So Darko Rajakovic, finally got that name right, for deciding to throw the Raptors a pizza party for 3 straight wins. 3 straight wins. And giving your team a pizza party, you have earned yourself this week's LOL moment of the week. And with that, it's a wrap for episode 105 of Let Me Speak. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us wherever you get your podcast, make sure you follow me on all social media platforms. On X, I am Joe Braverman, PBP. Of course, you can just search my name on Facebook and Instagram. Speaking of, you can follow the podcast on those platforms. You just got to search Let Me Speak Podcast. Thank you, everyone, again for tuning in, and we will see you next time for number 106, the episode of Let Me Speak. Later.